The lawyer's words still echoed in Claire's head as she stood ankle-deep in mud, staring at the collapsed Springhouse. Your brother's got the farmhouse, the equipment, and the livestock. You got whatever's left of this. Her brother Tom had actually smirked. Her brother Jim had looked away, embarrassed, but not enough to object. At least you got the land it's on, Tom had said, dangling the keys to Dad's F-250. All quarter-acre of worthless swamp. But that was 6 days ago. 6 days earlier, Claire pressed her forehead against the bus window, watching warehouses blur past in the pre-dawn darkness. $43 in her checking account. $62 in her wallet. The funeral was in 8 hours, and she'd had to choose between a bus ticket and her electric bill. The apartment would be dark when she got back, if she got back before the landlord changed the locks. Her phone buzzed. Tom, Dad's lawyer says reading is tomorrow 10 a.m. You coming, or should we just handle it? She typed back with numb fingers. I'll be there. The bus station in Millfield hadn't changed. Same cracked tile, same vending machine, that 8 quarters. Claire bought coffee with her last singles and walked the 2 miles to Palmer's funeral home in shoes that had split along the sole. Tom and Jim stood outside in dark suits, talking to cousins Claire barely recognized. Tom had gained weight, success weight, the kind that came from business dinners and golf games. Jim looked tired but comfortable, his truck parked at the curb with Harrison and Son Electrical on the side. Claire had come straight from her overnight shift at the packaging plant, her spare clothes in a plastic bag. Claire. Tom's hug was brief, obligatory. Tough trip. It's fine. Inside. She stood at the casket and looked at her father's face. Waxy, unfamiliar. They'd never been close. After Mom died when Claire was 19, Dad had poured everything into the farm, into Tom and Jim, who'd stayed to help. Claire had left for the city, chasing something she never found. She'd gotten pregnant at 21, married a man who left when their daughter Zoe was 2, and spent the last 8 years working every shift she could find. He looks peaceful, someone said. Claire nodded. Peaceful. That had been a lot of things, but peaceful wasn't one of them. The reading was in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee. Mr. Brennan, the lawyer, was older than Claire remembered, his hands shaking slightly as he opened the folder. Robert Holloway's estate is straightforward. The farmhouse, the 100-acre parcel, all equipment, and livestock go to Thomas and James Holloway, to be split equally. Tom leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Jim nodded. To Claire Holloway Winters, I leave the quarter-acre plot containing the original Springhouse structure, located at the northeast corner of the property. Silence. The Springhouse. Tom's voice was flat. The one that's been falling apart since the 80s? Mr. Brennan adjusted his glasses. The structure is compromised. The property includes the stone foundation and the natural spring, but the building itself is unsound. Jesus, Dad, Tom muttered. Claire, I'm sorry. That's basically nothing. The spring doesn't even flow anymore. Claire said nothing. She'd learned not to fight with Tom, who'd always been Dad's favorite. Not with Jim, who went along to keep peace. Not with anyone. Can I see it? She asked quietly. Tom checked his watch. Now? Claire, we've got to inventory the equipment, meet with the estate attorney. Just for a minute. They drove in Tom's truck, Claire wedged in the middle. The farm looked smaller than she remembered, the fields stitched with corn stubble. Tom parked near the tree line. There, he said, pointing. The Springhouse was a ruin. 3 walls of fieldstone, the 4th collapsed inward. The roof was gone, just rotted beams and scattered slate. Vines covered everything. A rusted lock hung from the door, what was left of it. Why would Dad leave me this? Claire asked. Tom shrugged. Guilt. Maybe. You were always Mom's favorite. After she died. He didn't finish. Claire walked closer. Her feet sank in mud. The ground here was always wet, fed by the spring that had once supplied the whole farm with cold, clean water. She touched the stone wall. Someone had carved initials. RH plus MC Dad and Mom. Claire, we need to go, Jim called. She took the key Mr. Brennan had given her. It was old iron, heavy in her palm. The lock resisted, then gave. Inside was darkness and the smell of wet stone. Fallen beams blocked most of the space. But in the center, surrounded by rubble, was the spring basin, a rectangular pool lined with fitted stones, maybe 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. The water was dark and still. Claire knelt at the edge. Her reflection looked back, pale, exhausted, 40 pounds thinner than she'd been before David left. She dipped her hand in. The water was ice cold. Something glinted at the bottom. "Claire, come on." She pulled her hand back. Probably just a coin or a piece of metal from the collapsed roof. But the glint had been strange, not the dull shine of old metal, but something brighter. Tom was honking the horn. Claire stood, locked the door, and walked back through the mud. On the drive to the farmhouse, she said nothing. Tom and Jim talked about selling the livestock, whether to rent the fields or farm them. Claire stared out the window and thought about the Basin. That night, she slept on Jim's couch and caught the 6 a.m. bus back to the city. She had to be at the plant by 4 p.m., had to pick Zoe up from her friend's house where she'd stayed during the funeral, had to figure out how to pay the electric bill with $43. But on the bus, as sunrise broke over the interstate, Claire Googled Springhouse and water basin and hidden. The results were mostly historical societies and preservation blocks. But one article made her pause. Colonial-era springhouses, more than refrigeration. She clicked through. The article talked about how wealthy families had used springhouses not just to cool milk and butter, but to hide valuables. The cold water preserved documents. The isolated location kept things safe from fire. And the basins themselves, with their fitted stones. Claire's thumb hovered over her cracked screen. Some basins, the article said, have false bottoms. Claire stood in her supervisor's office at the packaging plant, her hands shaking. "I need 3 days off. It's a family emergency." Rita looked skeptical. "You just took 2 days for the funeral." "I know. I'm sorry. But it's urgent. Claire, we're short-staffed. If you leave again, I can't guarantee your shifts when you get back." Claire thought about the glint in the water, about Dad's careful handwriting on the well, about the locked door and the carved initials. "I understand." She took the bus that night, arriving in Millfield at 2 a.m. She slept in the station until dawn, then walked to the farm. Tom's truck wasn't there. He'd gone back to Columbus, to his real estate business and his wife, who posted vacation photos on Facebook. Jim would be at a job site. Claire walked to the Springhouse alone. The key turned easier this time. Inside, morning light slanted through gaps in the collapsed roof, illuminating the basin. Claire had brought a flashlight, a dollar store special that flickered but held. She knelt at the stone edge and shone the light down. The glint was still there. Definitely not a coin. The shape was wrong. Claire took off her shoes and socks. The water was achingly cold. She stepped in, gasping. It was deeper than it looked, 3 feet, maybe 4. The stones under her feet were slick with algae. She reached down into the dark water. Her fingers touched something smooth, cylindrical. She gripped it and pulled. It was heavy, maybe 30 pounds. A metal tube, sealed at both ends with wax and wrapped in oilcloth. Claire hauled it onto the stone edge and sat dripping, staring at it. The oilcloth fell away in pieces. Underneath was copper, green with verdigris. She pried at the wax seal. It cracked. Inside was another tube, this one glass, thick-walled, hermetically sealed. And inside that, papers. Dozens of them, rolled tight. Claire's hands shook as she worked the copper tube open fully. The glass cylinder slid out. Through the thick walls, she could see handwriting. Signatures. Seals. She needed help. If you're following Claire's story, subscribe now. What she's about to discover will change everything. Dr. Yates arrived at the Springhouse 4 hours later, out of breath and carrying a leather bag. Claire had found him online, a local historian, semi-retired, who'd written 3 books about the county. She'd called from the Springhouse, her voice barely steady. "You said colonial documents?" he asked, kneeling beside the glass tube. "I think so. I didn't open it. I was afraid to damage." Smart. He pulled on white cotton gloves and examined the seal. "This is 19th century preservation. Someone knew what they were doing." He worked carefully, using tools from his bag. The seal gave with a soft pop. The papers inside were dry, pristine. He unrolled the first one with infinite care. His face went white. "What?" Claire whispered. "This is a land grant. Signed Bach." He adjusted his glasses. "By Thomas Jefferson, 1802, for 2,000 acres in the Northwest Territory. Is that valuable?" Dr. Yates didn't answer. He was unrolling the second document, then the third. His hands shook. "These are Continental loan certificates. Revolutionary War bonds. And these? Oh my God. These are stock certificates. Early railroad companies. Banking consortiums." He looked at Claire. How many tubes did you say were down there? I don't know. I only pulled up one. We need to get back in that water. They worked until dark. Claire dove again and again, her hands numb from the cold. Each time, she found another tube. 12 in total, wedged into crevices in the stone basin's walls, hidden beneath 200 years of algae and darkness. Dr. Yates cataloged everything in a notebook, his handwriting increasingly erratic. This is the Holloway family archive. Your ancestor, Robert Holloway, the original one. He was a land speculator, a financier. He bought war bonds at pennies on the dollar when the Continental Congress was desperate. He invested in canals, railroads, banks. But we were never rich. Claire said, Dad worked this farm his whole life. That's what I don't understand. Dr. Yates gestured at the documents spread on a tarp. These holdings would have made your family one of the wealthiest in the state. But there's no record of that wealth. It's like it just vanished. Claire shivered in her wet clothes. What are they worth now? I need to bring in specialists. But Claire, some of these railroad stocks, if they transferred through mergers and acquisitions the way I think they did, you could be looking at significant value. Millions. The number didn't feel real. Claire sat on the stone floor, surrounded by glass tubes and waterlogged papers, and tried to make it mean something. Millions. Her shift at the plant paid $13 an hour. There's a letter here, Dr. Yates said quietly. Sealed. Addressed to the daughter of my line. He handed it to Claire. The paper was heavy, the handwriting faded but legible. To the woman who inherits this spring, if you are reading this, you have been given what your brothers dismissed. You have looked where others refused to see value. This is as it should be. I am Margaret Holloway, wife of Robert, mother of 7. In 1849, when my husband died, his brothers claimed the estate. They took the house, the land, the livestock. They left me the Springhouse, a woman's place, they said. A place for butter and milk. They did not know that my husband trusted me with his fortune, that we had hidden it here, in the cold water that preserved our wealth as it had preserved our food. I never told them. I let them farm this land in ignorance while I used the bonds and certificates to educate my daughters, to purchase land in my own name, to build a life they could not control. But I was afraid they would discover the truth. So I sealed the archive and left instructions for my daughter, and she left instructions for hers, through each generation. Hidden in plain sight. Dismissed as worthless. When the men in your family scorned this inheritance, they revealed their own blindness. You are the daughter of my line. You saw what they missed. Do not let them tell you this is theirs. It never was. Margaret Holloway, 1851. Claire read it twice. Then a third time. The paper trembled in her hands. She hid it from them, she whispered. For 200 years. Waiting for someone like her. Dr. Yates nodded. And now we need to find out what it's worth. 3 days later, Claire sat in a conference room in Chicago, surrounded by people in expensive suits. Dr. Yates had made calls. Those calls had led to more calls. Now she faced a team of specialists, a rare documents dealer, a financial historian, 2 lawyers, and a woman from Sotheby's. They'd spent 6 hours examining the archive. Their faces had grown increasingly astonished. The Sotheby's representative spoke first. Ms. Winters, the documents themselves, the land grants, the Jefferson signatures, are worth approximately $12 million at auction. Possibly 15 if we market them correctly. Claire gripped the armrests of her chair. But the financial instruments are the real story, the historian continued. These railroad stocks, the banking certificates, they've transferred through dozens of mergers over 2 centuries. We've traced the lineage. If these are authenticated, and we believe they will be, you own shares in 7 major corporations. The current value is. He slid a paper across the table. Claire looked at the number, then looked again. $249 million. That can't be right. It's conservative, one of the lawyers said. The authentication process will take months. Some stocks may be invalid. But Ms. Winters, the lowest estimate we're comfortable with is $200 million. The room spun. Claire thought about Zoe, about the apartment with no electricity, about the shift supervisor who'd told her not to come back, about Tom's smirk and Jim's embarrassment and Dad's locked strongbox of a heart. What happens now? She asked. Claire stood outside Tom's real estate office in Columbus, the authenticated documents in a leather portfolio. She'd called ahead. He was expecting her, though he didn't know why. The receptionist led her to a glass-walled conference room. Tom sat at the head of the table, phone in hand. He looked up and frowned. Claire? What are you doing here? We need to talk about the Springhouse. He sighed. Look, if you need money, just say so. I can't buy you out. It's worthless land, but I can probably spare a few thousand to help you get on your feet. I don't need your money, Tom. Then what? Claire opened the portfolio and laid the documents on the table. I need you to understand what Dad really left me. She told him everything. The basin, the tubes, Margaret Holloway's letter, the railroad stocks and land grants, and Revolutionary War bonds. Tom's face went from confused to skeptical to pale. That's impossible, he said. If this existed, Dad would have known. He would have used it. He did know, Claire said. Dr. Yates found Dad's journal in the farmhouse attic. He discovered the archive 30 years ago, right after Mom died. He read Margaret's letter, and he made a choice. She pulled out a photocopy of her father's handwriting, shaking slightly. I found Mother's secret today. The Springhouse holds more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But Margaret's letter is clear. It passes through daughters, not sons, not men who dismiss women's work as worthless. My Claire, she's so much like her mother. So much like Margaret must have been. Smart, quiet, stronger than she knows. When the time comes, I'll make sure she gets what's rightfully hers. Tom's jaw worked silently. He knew, and he gave us the farm anyway. The farm is worth maybe $2 million, Claire said. He gave you a good life, Tom. A real inheritance. But this was never yours to have. You can't just, Claire, that's family money. It should be split. No. Her voice was steady. Margaret's letter is legally binding. The lawyers confirmed it. This archive passes matrilineally. It's mine. It was always mine. Tom stood abruptly, pacing. This is insane. Jim needs to hear this. We'll contest. You can try, but Tom. Claire met his eyes. I'm not the broke single mother you can push around anymore. I have lawyers now. Good ones. And they're very clear that you have no claim. She left him there, stunned and speechless, and drove to the farmhouse where Jim was replacing fence posts. He took the news better, stunned, but without Tom's anger. Jesus, Claire, he said, sitting on the porch steps. I'm happy for you. I really am. That's life-changing. It is. She paused. Jim, I'm buying the farm from you and Tom. Fair market value, $2.5 million. I'm turning it into something Mom would have loved. An education center, agriculture programs for women, a museum about Margaret and the daughters of her line. Jim's eyes filled. Mom would love that. I know. Claire touched his shoulder. You're a good man, Jim. You always were. 6 months later, Claire stood in the restored Springhouse, watching workers install climate-controlled displays. The basin had been preserved exactly as she'd found it, the water still cold and clear. Above it, in Margaret's handwriting behind museum glass, hung the letter that had started everything. Zoe ran in, breathless. Mom, the school bus came. Can I ride it? Please. Claire smiled. Their new house sat on the property, a real house with 4 bedrooms and working heat. Zoe attended the private school 3 miles away, where her asthma was managed by the full-time nurse and her future was bright with possibility. You can ride it tomorrow, Claire said. Today I'm driving you. In the museum's main room, Dr. Yates was installing the final exhibit, the authenticated documents, the stock certificates, the land grants. Some had sold at auction for record prices. Others Claire had donated to institutions. But the core of the collection remained here, in the Springhouse where it had waited for 2 centuries. Claire, Dr. Yates called. The Times reporter is here for your interview. Claire walked out into afternoon sunlight. The reporter was young, eager, recording on her phone. Ms. Winters, you've been called the accidental heiress. How do you respond? There was nothing accidental about it, Claire said. Margaret Holloway built this fortune deliberately. She hid it deliberately. She chose who would inherit it deliberately. I'm just the latest daughter in her line. Your brothers have been vocal about their disappointment. My brothers inherited a profitable farm and a comfortable life. They're doing fine. What will you do with your wealth? Claire gestured at the Springhouse, at the fields beyond where construction crews were building classrooms and dormitories. The Margaret Holloway Center for Women's Agricultural Education. Free programs for single mothers who want to farm. Scholarships, research grants, and a museum that tells the truth about women's hidden labor. The work that built America while men took credit. The reporter's eyes shone. That's remarkable. No, Claire said. It's just women finally getting what we earned. That evening, Claire stood at the basin one last time before the museum opened. She dipped her hand in the cold water and thought about Margaret, hiding wealth in plain sight. About her own mother, who'd loved this farm and died too young. About Dad, who'd understood in his own silent way what needed to happen. Her phone buzzed. Tom had sent an email. The subject line was, "I'm sorry." She read it standing there in the Springhouse, her hand still trailing in the water. "Claire, I was wrong to be angry. Dad knew what he was doing. You deserve this. You always worked harder than Jim and me. You just did it where we couldn't see it. I'm proud of you. And I hope when the museum opens, there's space for me to visit. I want my kids to know this story. I want them to know their Aunt Claire saw value where I saw nothing. Love, Tom." Claire smiled and typed back, "There's always space for family. Come to the opening. Bring everyone." She locked the Springhouse and walked across the property to her home, where Zoe was doing homework at a real desk in her own room, where the refrigerator was full and the heat worked and the future stretched out like the fields beyond the window, fertile, promising, theirs. On the mantel sat a framed photograph, Margaret Holloway, stern-faced in Victorian dress, standing beside the Springhouse. Claire had found it in Dad's belongings, tucked in his journal. "Who's that?" Zoe had asked. "That's your great-great-great-great-grandmother," Claire had said. She was a genius, and she made sure women like us would never be invisible again. Now Claire stood in her living room, looking at Margaret's face, and raised an invisible glass. "Thank you," she whispered. Outside, the spring flowed cold and clear, just as it had for 200 years, just as it would for 200 more. Waiting, watching, holding secrets that only the right eyes could see. And in the Barnturn Museum, Margaret's letter waited for tomorrow's visitors, for the daughters and mothers and women who would read it and understand. "You are the daughter of my line. You saw what they missed. This was never theirs. It was always yours." Claire turned off the lights and went to tuck Zoe in. Tomorrow the museum would open. Tomorrow reporters would come, and visitors would marvel, and Tom would arrive with his family to see what his sister had built. But tonight was just for them. Two daughters in a long line of women who refused to stay hidden, who turned dismissed inheritances into empires, who knew the truth Margaret had written in 1851. The most valuable things are often the ones men overlook. And the women who inherit those overlooked treasures? They change the world.